Naming, I want us to remind ourselves where we've been and where we're headed uh, in what we do in Levin. We're rooted in the practices of sacred organizing, a spiral, yeah, the spiral of sacred organizing. And you can take a little glance to remind and orient yourself. We won't be saying all these, but if you remember, we've been walking through the sacred encounter, in particular, one-to-ones that in relational meetings, as well as, if you remember, from a few months ago, we started going into the sacred unveiling, revealing where power lies to initiate change. So imagine going through that spiral. And we talked about research meetings and a little bit about power analysis. And just to orient ourselves in the spiral, it spirals then into sacred action and sacred pause. But as with most things in organizing and in life, it's not always exactly linear. For example, we'll talk about today, which Melissa will introduce, house meetings. There's a little bit of sacred encounter, a little bit of unveiling, maybe even a little bit of an action there. So you'll just want to remember and orient ourselves in this spiral and seeing how power with and connecting in solidarity with one another grows as we move through this spiral and as we grow together for the impact and change that we want for ourselves, our communities, and this world. And with that, I pass it back to Melissa.
Thanks, Chris. And tonight we're going to hang out in that kind of intersection, like Chris said, of sacred encounter and sacred unveiling through a practice that we call house meetings. We are going to engage in a practice of house meetings tonight to learn how to do them with our bodies, with our stories, with our hearts. So you can have a feel for them and start to imagine how these might take shape in your community and what they might do. So what are house meetings? They are ways to expand the listening that you're doing and weave power among with a broader group of people than perhaps you've been able to get at as a team in your one-to-ones. They are a series of small relational gatherings, 7 to 12 people, in homes or in a yard or virtually, like we're going to do tonight, during a defined season that we call a listening season, a period of time. And we like to kind of say, we're going to do these over a specific period of time, like over the course of a few weeks. Who are they for? Well, they're for whomever you want to weave community with. Who do you want to be in solidarity with? What kind of community do you want to build who cares enough to act together? Who are the folks that you want to bring together? So you might consider a mix of congregation members and neighbors and friends and community partners, or maybe there's another body that you want to organize. And so that's who the who is. And your design teams will be the conveners or the hosts, the facilitators of these house meetings. So why do we do them? Well, we in our core teams have been doing one-to-ones with folks. But we then, just as a team, hold those stories and relationships. And what we're trying to do is, again, weave a community that cares about one another, knows what we care about together, and can act together. So we do house meetings to expand our listening and uncover the hidden stories of our community, what and who we care about deeply. We're going to identify the pressures and where they're coming from together in these house meetings. And we're going to, through the series of house meetings, we're going to weave a more whole collective story with the collective power to actually make change and around that story and those pressure points, and together create a new, more liberative story together. And we're going to move to the next slide. Thanks so much. So tonight we have the opportunity to engage a house meeting as a part of our cohort. And so we're going to begin to step in to that house meeting together. I'll pass it to Chris.
Because not only did you enter the space of Levin Land and Housing, but you have now entered into a house meeting. Gather with me, step into my virtual home with my virtual real life sweater and with my wonderful co-host, Melissa, in our home. Don't worry, I brought a couple of snacks, a little cheese platter for us as we step inside our house meeting. And oh, look who comes here. We have some guests arriving. Hi, Sarah, how you doing?
Oh, hi. Oh, yay, Anna, welcome. Welcome to our house meeting. Yeah.
Don't worry, you can keep your shoes on or off.
If you brought a cardigan, you're welcome to wear it. Who else is coming? Did you guys all enjoy the beautiful spring flowers as you were arriving to the house? Yeah.
Your yard looks great.
It does, actually.
Yeah, don't mind the mess back there. Actually, don't mind the mess back there. It's a real house. It's real life. Oh, hi, Josh.
Oh, Josh! Yay! No sweater, but a very nice plaid.
Sweater would make me way too hot. Yeah.
What? Good evening, Marianne. Welcome to this wonderful house meeting we've got here. Hi, Lauren.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
We also have, I was going to say, just some pork in the back. All right.
I think we're also expecting Yasmin tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Yasmin.
And Andy.
Oh, hi there, Yasmin.
Hi. Hi, hola. Thank you.
Oh, Andy, welcome.
And LaVeta.
Hey, everybody. Got my cardigan.
Yes.
Not every house meeting has to, in fact, have cardigans, although it is highly recommended. Is this everybody?
It is, because the host can't add herself to the spotlight.
Okay. We'll miss you, LaVeta.
We'll see you on the sideline there.
Well, everybody, welcome. Again, I think I know most of you, but I just want to introduce myself. I'm Melissa. I'm co-hosting tonight with Chris, who will introduce himself in a moment. I said yes to this house meeting and these series of house meetings and this conversation about the intersection of housing and immigration justice, because housing has been something that's been on my heart maybe my whole life. I moved around a lot as a kid. I think I've moved on average, before I moved to Portland, I probably moved on average every 3 years, mostly because of what my family did for work. But it was so important to have community when we came. And I've realized as an adult, the ability to be able to stay where you are, to build community is so important for a sense of stability. And it was really hard and kind of scary over a few years, over a number of years of living in Portland, to be a renter and just like really not know if we would be able to stay in our place. And that really disrupted our family's sense of belonging. And we were finally able to buy a home. Sorry, my dog, welcome to my home. We were able to buy a home, but we had to stretch ourselves, and it's honestly, it's a financial weight to own this home. And it always feels like we're a little on the edge. And I'm like, we have 2 full-time jobs between me and my partner. And like, if we can't afford to live here, if we can barely afford to live in Portland, who gets to live here? And a lot of folks I know can't afford to buy a home and have that stability. And so I want that for all those I love and care about. Chris, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Dela Cruz, and why I decided to be a part of this house meeting really comes back to many of you know that I was in New York City before I was in Portland, and actually in the organizing that I was a part of in New York City, one of my first house meetings I participated was a group just like yourselves, except it was mostly a group of young millennial Black and brown folks in Southside Jamaica, all right, Jamaica, Queens. And it was folks who all were trying to do the right thing. Many of them had gotten the right steps of education or jobs, and many of them were doing everything quote unquote right, but were 20 somethings and early 30 somethings. Many of them were still living in their parents' basements rather. And they were not because of anything other than the fact that they couldn't afford to live anywhere in New York City. And it impacted me so much to hear one story after another. And then I remember my family, when we moved to Portland, same exact thing. I am currently in an apartment, and any talk of houses and trying to find one, and I've a spouse and 2 kids, and it's and again, and that's just my own story, much less the folks I know who are struggling so much in regard to housing. And so all of you here who are members of the Levin design team and are also here, to start with a prompt so we could go around and begin to kind of get in touch with our stories. The prompt I have for this house meeting, if you could say your name, your pronouns, and your community you're from, and then name one person who's a story, who's a housing or land story experience you bring to this conversation. Let me say it again. Name, pronouns, community, and then name one person whose housing story, whose housing struggle brings you here. Okay? Whoever wants to go first, go, and just say the name. Right, yeah. Your name, pronoun, community, and then the name, and then you could invite someone else.
I'm Sarah Loze. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a member at Havara Shalom Synagogue, and the name is Belinda.
Hi, my name is Anna. I use she, her pronouns.
Hi, my name is Mary Ann. I use she, her pronouns. I'm from First Unitarian in Portland, and the name that I bring with me is Maggie.
Anna, I she, her pronouns, and I want to bring the story of Angeles is in my mind today.
I'm Lauren. I'm from St. John's Church in North Portland. I use she, her pronouns, and the story I'm bringing is my friend Andrea.
Hola, mi nombre es Yasmín y mi pronombre es ella. Y vengo de Leven y también soy parte de Culi. El nombre que pongo es de Antonia.
I'm Josh Dunham. I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm from Covenant Presbyterian Church in Gresham, and I bring the name Abby.
Andy. I use he, him pronouns, and I bring the name Chad.
Thanks, everybody. It's good to be with you and to be with all those folks you bring in your hearts. Well, this is one house meeting that the Levin Land and Housing Coalition is having in a series of 25 house meetings across our coalition over the next month. And we're doing this to listen and uncover our shared stories around the intersecting pressures of land, housing, and migration in our own lives and in the lives of our neighbors and our loved ones. We trust and we have experienced that when we put our individual stories in dialogue with one another, we step out of isolation and begin to weave community and a collectively held narrative. We discover what's really going on in our community and what's really our story. And together, we then have the power and the imagination to discern pathways for collective action towards life and liberation. So house meetings are a part of unveiling where power lies, that we have power together, that we are not alone, that we are not individuals, even though the systems we exist within will tell us that. And we're going to start to unveil, what systems are at play that connect our stories, that have power over us, that we may need to change together to relieve the pressures that are impacting us as a community. Chris?
And also, we could see how, what we'll see is how this house meeting will help us build that power, that there is power in this relationship building that we're doing with one another and with this series of house meetings that we're doing throughout this month. We are developing and strengthening relationships with each other and with the life force, the spirit, the divine that sustains and moves among us, because we believe in this sacred organizing that something greater than ourselves is connecting us with one another. And there's real power in that and within us. Melissa?
Awesome. Thank you so much. We, as Loving Community Land and Housing, have a practice of acknowledging the land that we're on. So and just invite everybody to take a deep breath, to find their feet on the ground. Remember the ground that is below whatever floor you're standing on, the land that is living. And I'll invite LaVeta to share our land acknowledgement. I'll read it slowly and contemplatively, and I invite you to breathe through it. Let it really move through you as you touch your own breath that you share and exchange with others and this land, this mother that holds us all. We gather tonight together on holy living land, earth, which supports and sustains us. We acknowledge that this region is the ancestral and unceded territories of the original peoples of the Multnomah, Wasco, Clackamas, Cathlamet, Cowlitz, Willamette, Tumwater, and Cascade bands of Chinookan peoples, the Tualatin band of the Kalapuya, and many other tribes who made their homes along the Columbia and Willamette River. These folks lived and thrived in profound, complex, and interdependent relationship with the land and other beings, long before white colonial settlement. We recognize we are here because of systemic policies of genocide, relocation, and assimilation that was forced upon them. Today, we acknowledge the region's diverse, vibrant, Native communities who are still connected to this land. Indigenous peoples, 70,000 strong, with more than 280 tribes and with at least 18 unique languages, both local and distant. We extend our deepest gratitude to our siblings and elders, past and present, who has stewarded this land and who carry on tribal traditions for present and future generations. Let's take a moment of silence in reverence and gratitude. Thank you, everyone. We arrive both as guests, as this is not our owned by ourselves land, and with inherent belonging. Chris.
Thank you, Melissa. Well, in the land where my parents and ancestors were from, in the Philippines, there too were indigenous cultures that thrived before those who were colonialists, those who were under the colonization movement, if you will, came, the Spanish and indeed the United States. And in the Filipino indigenous tradition, we believe in a concept called kapwa, the recognition of a shared inner self and being with others. In kapwa, we believe that my fate is tied with Melissa's fate, whose fate is tied with Yasmin's fate, whose fate is tied with Andy's fate, and all the rest. And so for our spiritual grounding here in this house meeting, I invite you to take candles that you all have here. And as you hold the candle, bring to mind the person whose housing and land story you had mentioned you brought into the conversation. Remember that name. Remember the person behind that name. And I invite you now to light your candle, bringing their story into the room. I invite you to hold that candle up and bring that person's story here. Because in kapwa, in solidarity, these stories of real people are in the room and they light our path forward. These stories, it should be named, are not equivalent, these housing stories. They do not necessarily have the same relationship with power, privilege, white supremacy, patriarchy. In their individual candles and what they represent, these people, these stories do bring their unique pain from unique communities and ancestors in unique relationship to the land. But as you hold up these candles to the screen and see how they shine brighter when they shine together. See our solidarity in recognizing our shared being, our shared kapwa with the folks we are bringing here and the solidarity we have with one another. I invite you now to place your candles down in a safe location where they can stay lit through the rest of the house meeting. And I invite you to take a deep breath as we transition. Take a deep breath in. Take a breath out. And now I'm going to invite Josh Dunham, who's from Covenant Presbyterian, as well as someone who's come forward who has agreed to be vulnerable in sharing their own story of land, housing, and migration. Thank you, Josh.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks, Melissa. Thanks for hosting this event this evening and inviting me to take part in it. I'm very humbled by that. And it's wonderful to be in this circle with you all today. Yeah, would say I need to start in a place of acknowledging that being the person I am, I often avoid the deeper. And in this work, I've realized that avoiding the deeper means that you're not going to have the strength to continue the long work that this takes. And I learned that, and I've learned that through this time and through reflecting on my own story and coming to the acknowledgement and the place of the depth of my story and where it comes from and what it means to me here, more than anywhere else. And so my story begins with 3 kids growing up in Northeast Portland. I'm a born and raised Portlander, and my parents raised us in inner Northeast and inner Southeast Portland. Grew up at Westminster Presbyterian Church in Portland, and grew up in an environment where we felt like we were pretty well taken care of. But I have, for those that know my family, I have a younger sister who has Down syndrome. And she has always shaped pretty much how I have looked at the world and how I've engaged the world, because she's only 2 years younger than me. And so I have no memories before she existed. And one of the things that came to fruition and knowledge at a much earlier age than probably many of us realize is when you see the world treating people differently and the world interacting with people differently based upon how they look versus who they really are. And I learned that earlier, probably than many. And I also learned that our world has not been set up to take care of people who are differently abled. And I learned that our housing system is exceptionally broken as we engage with people who are differently abled. And it came to knowledge when my sister, after going through regular elementary school, regular middle school, regular high school, graduates with a high school diploma, goes to PCC and starts taking classes in PCC and decides that she wants to move out on her own. And recognizes that there's going to be, she even recognizes that there are problems with wanting to do that. In the great economic downturn that happened in the early aughts, my sister was one of the first people I know that lost their job. One of the things I learned is that the people who are on the margins are often the ones that are sacrificed first in these situations. My sister has not ever been able to find regular work since that point. 20 years. And part of it is that the search for finding regular work means putting on notice that she can no longer receive Social Security. And many of the jobs that she would qualify for would pay her far less than Social Security. But being on Social Security means that also too, she doesn't necessarily rise to the top of the pile when applying for housing. She has to put herself into the realm of those who are seeking affordable housing, assisted living housing. You want to know how long the waits are for those? Multi-year waits. And so I'm thankful. I'm thankful that my sister has been able to live with my mom, has been able to live with my dad, and has had a place to live. But she hasn't been able to express and put herself into a place that she's wanted to be, which is as an independent living person. And also I express these things too, because there have been times where I've had conversations with my wife about it may come to a point where my parents can no longer provide for my sister. Who does that fall to? And then becomes us. And we've had the conversations about what does it look like to have space for my sister in our home and create that space for her, an independent space. And I know that it's even impacted previous relationships, ending them because of that conversation about having a family member living and a long term. So that impact, that story sticks with me. When I think about every time we're doing this work, it's my sister, it's Abby who comes to my mind, who drives me, who keeps me going in this work.
Thank you so much, Josh. Thanks for introducing us to your heart and your life and your Abby. We're going to have the opportunity to go into one-to-one conversations as a house meeting, but if I were to take my cardigan off, I'd say, for everybody in the room, you're going to get to do a one-to-one conversation too. And I'm going to have Sarah put the prompt for the one-to-one in the chat, so you can start to feel into it, into your memories, into your bodies where our memories and stories live. The question is, how have or are you experiencing tenderness and or struggle in your relationship to land, housing, and or migration? You might look back and forward a generation or two in your family, as well as to those you love and with whom you are in relationship. So how have you or are you experiencing tenderness and struggle in relationship with land, housing, and or migration? And again, this may be in relationship like Josh's with a family member's experience, which is certainly a part of his life and story. For instance, my grandfather was houseless when he died. I didn't really put those pieces together until I started doing this work, but that is a part of my familial story and connects with why I show up. So we're going to go in a moment and do those one-to-ones, but I just want to name that it takes courage and vulnerability to share in this way, especially when we begin to voice aloud the parts of our stories and our family's stories that we don't normally talk about. That we live in a culture of white supremacy that tells us to just talk about the good stuff, and we should have our stuff together. But we need to be honest about so that we can know what's really going on, and step out of isolation together into solidarity. These conversations invite meaningful connection. They help develop relationship founded on mutuality. We all have a story, as opposed to objectifying someone else and their story, which then objectifies ourselves in the process. They help us understand ourselves as part of a shared struggle for liberation from oppressive and racist systems. And they encourage us to see how we are all negatively impacted by those systems, albeit in different ways. And when we're in touch with our own story, especially as folks who have privilege, if you have privilege, which most of us have some margin of privilege, I myself have privilege as a white cis woman in this world. When I acknowledge my own pain and my own impact, alongside my privilege, it keeps me, again, from objectifying others and participating in saviorism. This is not about just the other, it's about the we. And so I just want to remind us that we can connect without equating our stories. Does that make sense? We can connect our stories without equating them. We have different and connected stories. How, why, and to what degree we are oppressed and how, why, and to what degree we benefit from oppressive systems is based on our identities and marginalities because our systems are fraught with white supremacy. So listen in the conversation for difference, as well as resonance and connection through the systems that isolate us and cause our pressures. White folks, I encourage you to be brave and share vulnerability. Follow Josh's lead. I don't know about you, but again, like I was taught to have all my stuff together, and if I didn't, what I was struggling with must be my own, and my own fault, right? For instance, student debt. I have $100,000 of student debt. I really thought that was like my fault until I started realizing so many people I know have student debt. So there's a systemic issue here, folks, and so who benefits, right, from keeping us isolated and not talking about what we're struggling with? So, and if I'm struggling with student debt with all the privilege I have, imagine folks who don't have all the privilege I have and also are saddled with that debt. So we can't be in solidarity if we don't discover how both our oppression and liberation are bound up in one another. And who benefits, again, from us not connecting? So we're going to dig in together and develop authentic relationship. For BIPOC folks in the room, remember that no one has inherent right to your story. You may practice boundaries tonight and share only what you feel moved to in the conversation as we work together to build trust, which will be lasting relationship for the long haul, hard work that we are about together. Good. So just take 1 minute and connect with the prompt that's in the chat around your own housing and or land and or migration story. And again, go back a generation or two. Also think about the generations to come, your children or grandchildren, and how we are, like, what is your story, and where is the tenderness and the struggle in your story? And LaVeta, while we do that, is going to prepare the breakout room.
The breakout rooms are prepared.
Okay, we'll have roughly 20
15
minutes, 15 minutes in breakout rooms. And so dig in and we'll see you in 15 minutes. Make sure both have a chance to share.
Okay. I'll give you a halfway point when we're done.
Great.
Yeah, I feel some sorrow and weight also and grief, but like also just a sense of resolve, like a strength of wanting to, just like a motivation of like, we really got to do this, y'all, like, because this is us and our community and the people that we love, and just yeah, like more energy for doing the hard work that it takes to make the change happen, that so we can all, yeah, thrive together.
I'm feeling a deeper sense of shared humanity, a deeper sense of like there are fellows along this journey together. And even though it's heavy and hard, it feels like sharing that is better, if that makes sense. That's where I'm feeling.
Yo me siento muy conectada y más enraizada de escuchar las historias que pues nos hacen sentir vulnerable, pero a la vez nos hacen sentir esa fuerza y esa energía de seguir en la lucha, y me siento como con dos cosas, triste, pero a la vez con esa vela encendida, ¿no? Que podemos seguir en el camino juntos.
You know, I really feel touched by hearing the stories I heard, the story from Marianne and the story from Josh, which both had convergence in many ways. And I do feel a sense of solidarity. I appreciate your vulnerability, Josh, in particular. And I really do, and I know you're very conscious, Josh, of kind of being the white male and the man in the room. I'm just going to name it. I know you'd be comfortable with that. And I think as a person of color, I appreciated you understanding that this housing work isn't just stuff you do for people you have pity over. Because I've often felt as a person of color, when the white person just has that saviorism and doesn't touch in themselves, how even if the story is not equivalent, like I actually really appreciate the vulnerability and the solidarity, the kapwa of knowing that we all have suffering and pain in some way, and in ways that I don't understand in your story, and you might not understand fully in my story, but that, you know, I don't know, together. Yeah, sorry, I love what you said. Like now I'm like, also like, we gotta like do something, but in a way that's not just like rushing and not doing anything, but seeing the power that happens when it's kind of coming together. And to sort of name those somethings, what are some of those pressures and struggles and sufferings that surfaced in your one-to-ones, or that you feel comfortable sharing within the whole group, whether from yourself or from what you heard in other stories?
I heard in the stories in my one-to-one conversation, which was a one-to-one-to-one conversation, was the realization of looking at the long term and going, how can I survive this? You know, the realization of looking at the long term and going, how much longer will this last? You know, extrapolating out the cost of our housing, extrapolating out the change of my income, the change of location, all of that stuff, and hearing that in the 3 stories and going, that stress is a universal stress, no matter where we are. And I heard that, and that meant something in our conversation to me. Yeah.
Others, what types of pressures, struggle, suffering, suffered, surfaced in your conversation?
Related to what Josh said, I heard Lauren and I both talk about having young teenagers, which is crazy that we have young teenagers, but that they're not that far from adulthood, and the fear of where will they go and what will they experience and will they be able to afford to live, and because of the stress that I'll share, like I feel in just trying to pull all the pieces together and have this home and afford the repairs needed, and the amount of anxiety that creates on a day-to-day basis. And we have like I said, a lot of privilege, and we have place. So I just like want to be really clear about that. But like, there's an element to kind of keeping up with the way the system is organized, which is incredibly stressful and isolating often, and makes you feel ashamed when it's hard. And Sharon, I mean, and I heard, Lauren, in your familial story too, of like the stress of trying to make the pieces all meet so that the housing works out. And that our systems are not organized in such a way to support us in that, but rather we find ourselves often having to make choices about like, do we work and make more money, but then we can't really afford housing, you know, like market rate housing, but then, or do we have social security, but like that doesn't work out either. Do you know what I mean? Like, so the, like making the ends meet.
I think for me, I have a sister who's mentally ill, and this activity actually made me really reflect on somebody who I grew up with, who has struggled all their life to have stability in their life and has been houseless themselves and has been in jail and in psychiatric institutions. And some of those are very traumatic places to live. And so I think it makes it, thinking about her life in more depth and all the different challenges she's had, I think gives me a lot more empathy for everybody else who's living on the margins, because she has been there. She isn't right now, but I think it's really unfortunate how much stigma there is attached to it.
How do you see all, you know, as we hear some of these stories, how do you see some of this suffering and pressures connect in terms of where they're coming from? Like what are, you know, as we kind of come together and we hear all these kind of different kind of pressure points, what's happening in here? It can't just be, you know, just these kind of individual, you know, failures or missteps, but there seems to be something bigger happening. What do you think is, what are these cultural, institutional, maybe systemic pressures coming from in terms of the stories we're hearing and from your own story?
No sé si es algo que pueda responder a lo que dijiste, pero una de las presiones que a veces siento es que hoy precisamente mi hija me llega con una pancarta de la universidad y me dice, mira mami, quiero entrar a la universidad y voy viendo la cantidad, 65,000, y digo, ok, lo que se me vino en la mente, con eso podría yo quizás dar algo para una casa, y ella se queda y me dice, mami, pero yo quiero entrar a la universidad, y entro en pánico y digo, ok, ya está a tiempo de entrar a la universidad, y ¿qué voy a hacer? Voy a tener que trabajar doble, triple, no tengo una casa, estoy luchando para poder tener algo, y eso me hace sentir como más hacia abajo, ¿no? Y decir, creo que tengo que seguirme quedando donde estoy porque no alcanzo para más. Entonces es como caer también como en una depresión y controversia, y no saber qué hacer en el momento que pues yo quiero que mi hija siga estudiando.
You know, I'll be honest, when I hear you say that and I hear kind of all these things sort of connect, I feel sorrow. And I also, you know, it's hard for me to admit, I feel angry. I feel angry at these systems that are affecting, and more of us are seeing so plainly how unveiled it is. I feel, yeah, I feel angry, and part of me feels helpless, though I feel less helpless being with you all. And I feel less helpless knowing, you know, this in relationship to the other house meetings we are conducting could maybe help us do something about this and build that power with one another.
Chris, I'll just reflect. I hope we go that direction, because my other feeling is just to like burn it all down. And I don't know if that's necessarily helpful, but that's the feeling that I get, you know. But that's also, I think, there's also an acknowledgement of a level of privilege to even, you know, contemplate and think about that. And so I think being part of like, yes, what do we do? How do we do it? And how do we build? And so thank you for challenging me to not be in the total destruction phase.
I'm taking a step back. You mentioned culturally, and I'm thinking there are other cultures where one doesn't feel that they are a failure if they don't own a home. That's not the expectation, that there's much more intergenerational living and living in community. So if everyone feels that to be successful, they must own a home, I'm questioning that right now, just because I have some friends that are they would not be managing a very serious illness on the part of one of them if they didn't have an intergenerational house where there's shared care. So maybe we need to take some step backs and look at alternative ways of living in community. I mean, how much of owning a home is so that you get equity and have, is this a financial structure that's been put upon us such that we think that's what we must have? I mean, yes, we need housing, but are there some different ways of living that make more sense, that tread lightly on the planet? I don't know, just I'm pondering that.
Well, Kate, I'm so glad that you stepped in from the hallway and we're listening in, because I think there's so much to really ponder there. And I actually suspect that there are folks who are also in the hallway who are have their own stories that they've shared, and we're so glad for that vulnerability. And at the time of evaluation, we might even have a chance to share a little bit, even if just through chat. Melissa, is there anything else we should ask, or anything, or should we? What do you want us to do, Melissa?
I just want to note that, like Kate and Josh brought up, there are times when we need to change the systems, and this is We Build Power here to change the systems. Why does Yasmin, and I know Yasmin's not alone, have to choose between the outrageous cost of education, that's a system, right? And the cost of housing and having home and place and space and future for her child? Why is that an either or and not a both and? That's a false choice. And so there are systems that need to be changed. And sometimes things need to be burned down. I don't know if I want to literally burn anything down, but we need to stop things from happening, correct? Dismantle things. And Kate just said, and we also need to create things. We need to, and I don't know about you, but I experience a lot of more creativity when I get to, like, when I'm honest about what the problem is together in community. I can start to see how bunk the whole, like, what we've been told has to be the norm and what is successful, like how that can be garbage, and actually what do we really want? So maybe it's just more of a comment but I'm so grateful that we are together and sharing these stories. And I just want to start to wrap up our house meeting and say thank you all so much for coming. We are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people together in this conversation. But we just remember that this is one of 25 house meetings happening throughout the 11 Levin Land and Housing Coalition. And so we're going to keep having these house meetings. And if you found this powerful, maybe you want to invite a friend or a loved one or a community member to one of those house meetings. I'll share afterwards the list of other times and places, and you can sign up and invite a friend to go to. And just imagine how we might get clear about what our collective story is, and who, like, that how we might come out of isolation and shame. We might have clearer eyes for what the problem, where the problem actually lies, and maybe clearer eyes about what we want to do about it together and the story we want to create together. So invite you to consider continue us in this journey of house meetings over the next few weeks. And normally at this time, we do an evaluation, but we're going to take off our cardigans in a minute and jump back into the cohort with all of our cohort friends. And we'll do that there as a larger cohort for the whole of our gathering. And we would probably also talk about next steps, which I just sort of did, but letting people know too, like, want to let you know, like, put your email in the chat, or you signed in when you came into the house, and we'll be sending an email out about how we're going to, like, bring all the people who are sharing these stories together and all of our stories together, so that we can start to discern what might be some actions that we want to take with this incredibly powerful group that we're building together. I think we're going to be like hundreds by the time we're done here in this listening process. And we'd also probably end with a closing ritual, which we'll do at the end of the cohort. So taking off my cardigan, thank you all for coming. So great to be in this house meeting with you all. Can we give some love to our house meeting participants from the larger group? And I want to send love to all of you for hanging in with us and walking alongside us in this process of house meetings, of experiencing a house meeting. I hope you're feeling a little bit inspired, maybe, that to host some of these yourself in your community and think about, who do we want to build? Who do I want to build power with? Who do I want to build community that cares enough to act together with? And we can engage house meetings to build capacity in different ways. And in this community of Levin Land and Housing Coalition, we've engaged house meetings to build power in some specific ways. One is communities have done house meetings to start to unearth the housing stories that are in and around the community, as in the process of discerning if there is a call for that community to build affordable housing on their land. And we've also had house meetings where there's already an affordable housing project, but we want to build like emerging from the community, but we want to combat NIMBYism, and we want to build capacity for the project, around the project, and to create good neighbor situations, and also collective power for any roadblocks we might run into in the neighborhood or with the city, things like that. And we've also used them around political action, where we have discerned an issue cut and we know there's this piece of the system we want to change, perhaps it's with policy, and we organize house meetings for people to come together, share their stories and write their testimonies and build power to get that policy changed. Tonight, we're going to hear testimonies around two of these kind of ways we've used house meetings. The first is Lauren Hawk, who is going to talk about how house meetings helped St. John's Community Church discern if they would build affordable housing. So Lauren, would you share your story with us?
Thank you, Melissa. Yeah, I'm Lauren Hawk. I am a part of the St. John's Church in North Portland. And my community of faith joined the Levin Community Land and Housing Coalition for the first cohort 3 years ago. we joined that cohort in a season of debate about what we were going to do with our land. So we had a leader, a faith leader, who had plans for affordable housing drawn up, but hadn't really done the work of community organizing and discernment collectively with our community. And so we had this season that was marked by ineffective meetings, random ideas popping up about things like a soccer field or a community center, but not a real cohesive season of discernment about what to do with our land. And so we were introduced to the Land and Housing Coalition and formed a team to learn about the work of sacred organizing and how it might impact our process of discernment as a community. And so after a season of intentional one-to-one conversations, we entered into a season of house meetings, and those meetings took place among members of our own congregation, some of our neighbors, including some of our neighbors who live in a transitional housing program called Community of Hope, which is pretty close to our community of faith. And Community of Hope is actually housed by a neighboring church. And so we had a handful of house meetings where we worked to vulnerably share our stories and invite others to share their stories around pressures that we were facing around housing, neighborhood, and community. These house meetings that we had helped us unveil many shared pressures around housing in our individual stories and our story as a congregation and among our neighbors. The vulnerability in our stories also revealed this kind of unspoken or almost informal legacy in our congregation among helping or around helping one another with housing. Several of the members in our congregation were actually renting from other members of our congregation homes from one another at well below market value rates. So the reason that some of our congregants were actually members of our congregation and able to stay in community was because of other members of our congregations renting to them affordable housing. And as well as just things like helping one another with moving, coming through with, money to help pay a heating bill. So there was already this collective concern that was unveiled through these house meetings around helping one another be housed. And so through those house meetings, these house meetings shifted the way that we spoke about our plans and our land. They instead helped us move towards being able to discern this collective concern that we had as a congregation around housing, and an almost unanimous desire among our congregation to explore how we might steward our land, our communal collective power, and our resources towards the work of affordable housing. So 3 years later, we've actually merged with another congregation. We have a tiny home transitional housing village that's operating on the land that we steward together. And we're continuing to explore the idea of building permanent supportive housing on the land that we steward. And I just want to continue to learn with all of you about this work and this process of sacred organizing and how it helps us to discern what's going on in our own stories, in our neighborhoods, and what we can do with our collective power. So thank you for inviting me to share that story. And I'll invite then Chris.
Yes, so I'll just share our plan with our Westminster core team and folks around what we're imagining with house meetings. So the Presbytery of the Cascades in the Presbyterian Church and Westminster Presbyterian Church are partnering with the primary mover here, which is Indigenous folks, namely within the Future Generations Collaborative, who we've partnered to have something called Barbie's Village, which is a tiny home village and a community center for Indigenous folks by Indigenous folks. And so Future Generations Collaborative is the primary mover in terms of the developing and all those sorts of things. And so our core team's task is how do we organize the neighborhood around so that rather than expect those kind of NIMBY or isms or worries, actually build relationships and power with folks in the neighborhood. So there is this, so we hope there may be invitation and there may be solidarity and welcome for the neighbors. And so what we're hoping to do, we've had one house meeting with folks actually in the, so it's in the Presbyterian Church of Laurelhurst, where that church used to reside, but now it's just land. And it's in the Laurelhurst neighborhood. And thanks to our someone in the core team, we had our house meeting with connected folks with the Laurelhurst Neighborhood Association. It wasn't a meeting with the association, but folks in that association, and who are largely supportive, who then could help with connections. And then we are connecting with folks that we are connected with in Westminster and with relationships we have. So we're starting with one-to-ones and then hoping to conduct house meetings within that neighborhood to start to build that power with by doing genuine listening. There is the sense of here's the project, but also what are concerns, but also in what ways can we find that solidarity with and build that power, and which will culminate in, well, the first culmination in June with a Horizon Action, where we gather folks on the land to celebrate and lament and to say that this land will be where Barbie's Village will reside. And so house meetings, we hope, will play an intricate part in that. Thanks. And now I invite Sarah to tell us, to charge us with next steps concerning house meetings and with your core teams.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And LaVeta, if you get a chance and can share the slides, that would be great. Two things briefly that I want to highlight. We encourage you to do a house meeting with your core team following the format that we shared in this gathering tonight. We'll send out in an email afterwards sort of a sample agenda for a house meeting that you can adapt for your different contexts and communities, but we invite you to go deeper with your core team using this format and practicing it together. And then to work with your companion to think about what house meetings could make possible for your community or congregation at this moment in your organizing. And that might be around discernment. It might be around building community within your congregation and within your neighborhood. It might be towards a specific action or policy change that you are already organizing around. But work with your companion to figure out what might house meetings make possible in your community? And we're really encouraging every core team to host at least one, if not more, house meetings with your community over the next 2 months. So your companion will be in touch with you to help having those conversations if you haven't already. And then an invitation, especially for those core team members and communities that are in East County. If you want to go to the next slide, LaVeta, hopefully many of you have already heard about this, but if not, we will be reaching out that our East County cohort cluster is going to be inviting core team members together for our own house meeting. Barbie too is graciously offered to host, and that's going to be this coming Tuesday. So watch for another email reminder about this, but we hope to see core team members from all of our different East County congregations together in person for a house meeting next Tuesday. Again, email coming with more information, but for now I'll pass it back to you, Chris.
All right, so we will have a chance for our, we will still have time and a chance for our core team breakouts, but we would like to end with an evaluation, including this first question, which, you know, many of you folks had some level of vulnerability of your own in your one-to-ones, and this is one possible way to channel that. My first question I would like to invite for the whole cohort is, if you had a series of house meetings like this in your community, because that's the call here, you are, what difference would it make? What shifts might happen? What might become possible? So in the chat, and I think this will help as we see, right, write in the chat what you think a series of house meetings like this in your community, what difference could it make? And with these gut reactions, I think that'll help inspire us in a snowball, or I guess we don't have a lot of snow here in Portland, so a cracker ball, I don't know, but some sort of ball. What could a series of house meetings, if you did this in your community, your context, what difference could it make? What might become possible? And even how are you inspired to see what movement could happen if you had a series of house meetings like this in your community?
So Mary Carter says more open communication, inspire more active listening, common vision, build deeper relationships with church, community, and neighbors, and see where the needs are. Dreams that fit together. The relationship building could mean greater possibility for collaboration. Finding more new leaders who can be part of the process.
Oh, that's really interesting, that idea of relationship building, and then identifying folks who could help leading in these. Wow, yeah. Keep putting in the chat your inspiration of, as if we had these series of house meetings, what difference could possibly be made. We also want to add, as part of your of this evaluation that we are doing with one another, another question. I want to add, Melissa adds, liberate us from shame and grow creativity, building empathy for persons who are houseless in our neighborhood. Yes, deepen collective commitment. Perhaps we could finally engage the congregation in discussion and building the will to do something meaningful in housing. I'm going to add another question. What is one insight or key takeaway from tonight? One insight or key takeaway from tonight.
Shift people's thinking from feeling from apprehension to excitement about what is possible. We will burn out of this work if we don't connect with it from the deeper place in us. Invite others into our stories and listen to theirs. It's a beginning that will lead to change. There are connections between us, no matter how different our housing stories are. Watching the possibility grow through questions that illuminate our common interests, shared heart. Kate Thompson's idea on living more communally. Home ownership is not a core value.
Melissa, shall I transfer to you?
Sure, thanks, Chris. We are going to do our closing. Again, thank you, everyone. You can stick around afterwards if you'd like to be put in your core teams, and LaVeta will be able to get you there if you have your the name of your community in your name on your screen. I want us to remember back to our stories and to the exercise, the practice that the design team did in their house meeting around naming the people whose stories we carry within us, that we bring to the table and that move us to this collective vulnerable table, where in breaking open, we discover connection and power for new life. I invite everyone in the room now to just reach into your own hearts and stories, and who are the people that you carry with you, that bring you into this work, and that you bring with you in your heart to this work. And let's just start to name. You can just put their first name in the chat, and we're going to close with a litany, just a a naming of those folks. So just take a moment and do that remembering. Put the name of that person, start to put that name in the chat. And then for my design team members, if you have your candles still lit and would like to hold them in solidarity with our cohort community, these candles each represent many lights that are present with us, those physically or virtually present and spiritually present in our hearts. We do this work in the name of Emily and Ken and Glynis and Patrice. We call on the hearts of Annie and Amadou and Steve and Angela and Antonio as we take the next steps. We walk in solidarity with Mary and Andrea. And Monique. We let the lives of Keisha and Taria and Lori and Nicole and Margarita and all the nameless farm workers who lived temporarily behind the house where I first lived. We let their lives touch ours. We receive the life of Jackie and all those on the streets this night in our city. Let their hearts be knit together with ours and give us courage to be in the struggle together so that all may come home, find place, and be liberated. Amen.
Okay,
Go in peace,
folks.
everyone. Thank you.